everyone to this recording. To this session. My name's Jane Bryan. I'm one of the professors in the law school at Warwick, and this is one of our talks on how to qualify as a lawyer, and lawyer in the widest sense. So I'm really, really pleased to have Dino, Rebecca, and Alicia here from Law Training Centre. I'll let you introduce yourselves, but to say a little bit more about the offer, the training offering, and how people can proceed to be a lawyer. So I will pass to the first person. Is that you, Rebecca, or Dino?
Yeah, it's been Rebecca. Thank you, Jane.
Okay.
Yeah, so hi everyone, and welcome again to today's webinar hosted by us, Law Training Centre, in partnership with Warwickshire Junior Lawyers Division. Thank you all again for joining, and thank you, Jane, and the team from Warwick Law School for helping us organise this session. We are really pleased to be presenting, like Jane said, on the different various qualification routes to qualifying after you graduate. So I'm going to introduce you to our keynote speaker for today, which is Dino Dulab. He's the co-founder and director of Law Training Centre and Access Law Clinic. He's going to share such useful, brilliant information on the various routes and the steps to qualify after you graduate. So over to you, Dino.
Thank you, Rebecca. I've got to make sure I live up to that intro there. Brilliant information. Absolutely. I'll do my best. I think we've got a lot of interesting stuff to cover today. So thank you all for joining, and thank you, Jane, and your team at Warwick Law School. It's a real privilege to be giving this talk today. It's a school we know long since, when we did, my wife and I did LLBs, and I think Warwick was on her list of law schools to go to. She ended up going to Kent, though. In our defense, when I Googled, we were in South Africa at the time. We looked at what's the most sunny part of the UK. So that's how we ended up in Kent. And it was also a good law school and other things. But yeah, so but we do love it up in Warwickshire, and I come up and do quite a lot of things with the Junior Lawyers Division. And I think that's how this came about. So it's great to bring, in-person events and bring it online and help people based all over the country and possibly all over the world today, because I know you must have a large international contingent as well. So of course, let's dive in and look at what we're going to talk about. And SQE is a hot topic, right? So it's talked about a lot, and I'm sure you all know a lot about it. But let's look at where you are today, and let's look at what you can become. And SQE is part of something that we'll look at today. I'll run through it as a brief recap on it, so that it gives you a baseline to compare what other routes look like. Today we'll look at what you can do after you qualify. So after you graduate from your degree, because once you've graduated, you've got to do the bit to actually qualify as a lawyer, and you've got options. You can become a barrister, a solicitor through the SQE route, a Silex lawyer through the CPQ qualification, or a chartered a counsel for licensed conveyancer, or probate practitioner. What a lot of people don't realize is in England and Wales, we have multiple lawyer types. And these aren't all, by the way. There's a couple of other authorized persons that I'm not going into today, but they include cost lawyers, they include notary publics, and certain types of accountants are allowed to do reserved legal activities. And it's the Legal Services Act that empowers all of these types of lawyers to actually practice law. And I think, well, I know England and Wales are at the forefront in terms of this, because most Commonwealth countries where English law is the foundation, certainly where I'm from in South Africa, we have three types. An advocate, which is equivalent to a barrister, and a attorney, which is like a solicitor. There's a third one, which is a conveyancer, but they have to be an attorney first, and then they do a specialism to become conveyancers in South Africa. Most other jurisdictions that are based on English common law have two types: attorneys and advocates, or solicitors and advocates, whereas we have a range of choice. And what we're here to do today is to go through that choice and help you find the right one. So let me tell you a little bit about what it is that we do at Law Training Centre, to give you some context as to why we know so much about all these individual routes. So we're an SQE prep provider, and probably more importantly, we're accredited by all the other major routes to qualify in law. So for SQE, there's no accreditation system by the SRA. So, you get a range of different providers. We stuck with full preparation courses for that. But our background starts with being fully accredited. So our first accreditation was with the Chartered Institute of Legal Executives. We then became accredited by the Council for Licensed Conveyancers, along with the National Association of Licensed Paralegals, and the Faculty Office of the Archbishop of Canterbury. That's a particularly interesting one, and one we're very proud of. The Faculty Office is the oldest regulator in England and Wales. It's over 500 years old, and when you become a notary public, you in fact get a parchment with a wax seal. It's incredibly rich history, steeped in history, and a great portfolio career for once you qualify as a lawyer and do something with that later. But coming back to why it's important in terms of our understanding of the knowledge that we're able to give you, we operate to very high accreditation standards. We get audited each year by all of these providers, and all of that know-how, all of that quality and assurance that we put into our accreditations, we run across our courses, so including our SQE prep and our other non-accredited courses. Importantly for you, and the big benefit for you today, is that we have a full, deep understanding. So not only do we deliver, we've built assessments, we've built course materials, we've worked closely with the regulators, we've even redesigned, for example, the Faculty Office one from scratch, the entire qualification from the ground up to modernize it because it had been so out of date. It gives us the ability to really impart with you our experience of seeing learners from different backgrounds, different goals, different aims, different availability to study, and see what works for them across the routes. We're also well versed in how to stitch the routes together to allow people to either dual qualify or cross qualify. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through, but we've purposely designed and chosen the routes that we offer to allow progression. So for example, a person could become a licensed paralegal because they're not sure what type of lawyer they want to be. But moving forward from that, that might give them exemptions from another route. So for example, if they then decide they want to be a property lawyer, that study and cost that they invested in that qualification wouldn't go to waste. It would actually allow them exemptions of another qualification and then qualify as a lawyer. A big focus for us is value for money and cost, and was a big reason why we started Law Training Centre. That leads me on to why we do what we do. This is my wife and our founder, Eve Dulab. We actually met in law school in South Africa. That's where I grew up, and she grew up in Greece. And studying law there was heavily based on English common law. And we chose England as the middle ground because a lot of people ask me how on earth, you could live in South Africa, you'd live in Greece, why do you live in England? Well, the law's really, really close to our heart, a very important part of what we do. And, England was a natural ground. What we discovered, though, when we arrived was really a lot of challenges. So don't get me wrong, hard work and law, we know what we signed up for in that. That's never been an issue. And we both worked and studied, even in South Africa and in the UK. Whilst we studied, we're not shy of hard work. That's not a problem. But some of the barriers that we came across, we just frankly didn't make sense. So most universities, nearly all actually, would not give any exemption for a law degree based on English common law and insisted the entire degree was started from scratch. So we'd be paying for 2 LLBs. That's on top of the previous degrees that we had as well. So the costs were getting out of control. Then we found out that, well, that's not enough. You're going to need to sign up to the legal practice course, and in a hope and a prayer, you might get a training contract. Because back then, there was over 10,000 people doing the LPC at any given time, and training contracts at its peak were 5,500 to 6,000 given out in a year. So chances of getting one were ridiculously low. And we thought, well, what kind of a profession is this that's front-loading people so heavily with debt with no guarantee that they can actually qualify to do the thing they're going to do, and perhaps come out with even worse outcomes than if they didn't study the qualification in the first place. So this is what prompted us to find a different way. And when we met a chartered legal executive who told us they're an equity partner in their law firm, they had in fact not done a law degree, they did the non-law degree pathway. Nobody really talks about it once people are qualified. You just get introduced and get told the person's a partner, and you take it for granted they're a solicitor, but in fact his chartered legal executive was very proud of the fact and told us all about it, and we started investigating and discovered these routes. I said, Eve said, we've got to do something about this. But her vision was, one, to make it entirely online and flexible, because we saw a lot of the challenge with the route, the way it was done, was basically correspondence and not engaging with modern technology. And, in the last 10 years, the way things have moved on, we can do things virtually. And back when we started Law Training Center, we didn't have Teams. We had to actually use a thing called WebEx, which I think some people at the university probably fondly remember, or not so fondly. It was incredibly clumsy to use. But that's why we do what we do. We've been there where you are today, faced with insane barriers in front of us, spiraling costs and not sure what to do. And I'm so glad we found this way, because we've seen too many people, leave the profession because of these barriers, and that doesn't have to be the case anymore. The really exciting bit for me is who we do this for. So the people that we've helped, and we've helped over 4,000 people and counting. A lot of them use LinkedIn, and for any of you who don't use LinkedIn, get on LinkedIn and start using it. It's an incredible platform. Lawyers use it a lot, and you'll see our alumni up there, what they're doing. Before starting with us, most of them had faced a dead end with no means to qualify, and were perhaps working in a role, a paralegal role or something like that, and not being able to then leave and go and do an LPC, for example, because they wanted to either live independently or financially they needed to, and the flexibility we've been able to offer and the affordability we've been able to offer has allowed them to qualify. And our alumni now include people who are licensed paralegals, chartered legal executive fellows with practice rights, so that means they're equivalent to a solicitor for their practice area. We've got licensed conveyancers, and we've got our first notary publics have come through as well. And some of our licensed conveyancers and our chartered legal execs are now directors of their law firms, and they're running entire teams. So they employ and hire solicitors to work for them. It's come full circle, and it feels like a long time, but in law years, 10 years is a very short time to see this amount of change. Another exciting thing we're seeing is law firms are getting behind it. When we started, 2 out of 10 people were sponsored by their law firm. Today, we are 6 out of 10, and some of our qualifications, it's even higher, the number of employers that are actually sponsoring. By that, we mean not sponsoring for a visa, but paying people to work and study this course at the same time. So people are earning whilst they're learning as well. So it's a real positive change, and it's happening at an increasing rate. So for those of you today, I know it probably looks quite tough, but let me tell you, there's a lot of positive change happening. And hopefully by the end of today's session, I'll give you some tips and tools and ideas on what you can do to take advantage of the change that's out there in the market. Before we dive into the actual routes, I would like to just talk about the 5 factors to consider when choosing the right pathway. So I always get asked this question, which is the best one? And I have to give a typical lawyer answer on that one. I say it depends. And people might just use one factor. Sometimes it might be just cost or the title. That's fine if that's all that impacts them. But always encourage people to look at the bigger picture and start with the area of law. People often chase the title, so they'll chase the title rather than what it is they want to do. Now, bearing in mind, you're going to do this work day in and day out for a long period of time, decades probably. So you really need to choose the area of law that you want to work in, because that will inform your choices as to title. So, for example, if you like advocacy and you particularly wanted to do criminal advocacy, well, you could choose a barrister title, but you could also choose a solicitor advocate title or a chartered legal executive advocate title. So when you look at it from the areas of law, that particular area has got 3 options. If you wanted to do property law, for example, you could become a licensed conveyancer, chartered legal executive, or a solicitor. A barrister wouldn't work. A barrister doesn't have the rights for property law. So look at the area of law, and then you can work backwards and see, well, what options are available. Start with that, because if you get the area of law right, your work will be much more enjoyable as you go on. A big one for you at this stage of your career, university graduates or soon-to-be graduates, assessment style. And to be fair, it's an important one for everybody, but it's probably quite topical for you, given you've just done your exams. And you'll all know what type of assessment suits you best. Some of you might find multiple choice questions great, and the SQE is very famous for this one. It uses a particular type of multiple choice question as well, not just a multiple choice question. It's the most correct answer. And if that system isn't suited, I know certainly for me, I would struggle greatly with multiple choice. I like to be able to explain a point in law. You can look at other routes that offer different assessment styles, so you don't have to be stuck with an assessment style that doesn't work for you. Another important factor is, of course, cost. The costs vary greatly, and we'll talk about those in a bit more depth so you can see that. And then you need to look at your work experience and the time to qualify. The routes are roughly 2 years. Silex takes 2,300 hours over 3 years. but most of the routes are around 2 years to qualify, and there's some measurement around hours, which we'll talk about as well. So you can look at that. Just helps you think about what kind of work you're going to be doing. You also then want to look at the work experience that you're required, because the traditional training contract is no longer. That's being phased out. You'll still see the name training contract, but it's not the traditional one where it's a three-way contract between you, the firm, and the SRA. Most law firms are using the QWE model, which gives much greater flexibility and works a lot better for everybody concerned. And I'll talk a bit about that as well when we look at the work experience requirements. So let's have a look at the areas of law and how they link. And solicitors under the SQE route and other previous routes as well are, in theory, licensed to practice in all areas. The reality is a solicitor will specialize in one area of law. So if you're really unsure, completely unsure about what you want to do, then perhaps that route is a route that keeps your options completely open. By now, you probably have an inkling, and you might want to gain some work experience to get further experience just to be sure. But a solicitor, even though they're licensed to practice in any area, you wouldn't want to do that because of the risk. And any law firm that you'd go to, for example, if you had work experience, you had 5 years PQE in criminal law, and then suddenly you wanted to become a family lawyer, no law firm would let you out on day one to deal with clients on your own in that regard. They'd want you to then get up to speed with family law. So just because a solicitor is licensed to practice in all areas doesn't mean they will do that. They'll specialize. The other routes are more specialized. So your chartered legal executive route, it's quite broad, like a solicitor, but they cover civil, criminal, and family. And for those three areas, they can do contentious, so they can do litigation as well as advocacy. So they can get even higher rights of audience as well. So put someone on the same footing as a solicitor, advocate, or barrister. They also do probate, property, immigration. Those three areas, they don't deal with litigation and advocacy, so they do non-contentious work. So if you're interested in those areas and not interested in disputes around that, that'd be a great fit. The CLC is the Council for Licensed Conveyancers, but they also regulate property probate practitioners. Probate is a part of the private client department. So you often won't see the word probate mentioned on law firms' websites, but you'll see private client. And private client encompasses a whole area from estate planning to actually dealing with an estate of someone who's passed. And that's what probate is. That's a regulated legal activity. A licensed conveyancer can do one or the other or both if they choose to dual qualify. Just so happens those two areas are in massive demand, and the certainty is death and taxes, and those two go hand in hand when it comes to conveyancing and probate. So when there's a probate matter, there's almost always a conveyance of a property. And when there's a conveyance of a property, a person needs to have a will and be planning for the eventuality of probate as well. So they're complementary areas and really future-proofs a person's career in terms of income and career prospects. And of course, we have barristers. The barristers typically deal with opinions and advocacy in various areas. So they'll give opinions to law firms, to other solicitors, like chartered legal execs and licensed conveyancers, for example, or they will actually conduct advocacy in various areas. And a barrister will, although licensed to do advocacy in multiple areas, will again specialize in one, maybe two at most. Let's have a quick recap on the SQE solicitor route. You've got your 4 steps to go through this. You need your educational prerequisites, so you need a degree or degree equivalent. And then you need to do SQE 1 and 2, the actual exams. SQE 1 is the now infamous multiple choice one. SQE 2 tests your practical legal skills. But bear in mind, SQE 2 does test legal knowledge as well, but not in the multiple choice format. So it's very thorough in terms of testing knowledge. And this is one where particularly LPC grads tend to perform worse than people who've not done the LPC, only because the time gap between when they've done the LPC and when they sat SQE2 is sometimes long, so you don't have that knowledge. So if you're looking at those two routes, bear in mind, although they're split, they have a big overlap in the knowledge that you need to do. So that's why it's encouraged that SQE2 is followed quite quickly after passing SQE1, so your legal knowledge is fresh. You don't need to gain your 2 years qualifying work experience, and you can do that before, during, or after. So it's a lot of flexibility. Unlike the old training contract, it was linear. You had to do step 1 and 2 first. With this route, you can now have, a lot of people we have actually gained their qualifying work experience long before even starting their studies on the SQE. And then once you've got all of that, you submit your application to the SRA. The real game changer for the SQE route is, in fact, the QWE, the qualifying work experience piece. So at the end of the day, there's still a set of exams to study. It costs a significant amount of money. But with the old route, you had this training contract, which was a very rigid system where you'd need to rotate. Back then it was 4 seats, now it's 3 seats. And it was a fixed contract between you and a law firm with no guarantee that you would remain on after the training contract. And a lot of people ask, well, and I was at meetings with the SRA when asked about this question, said, well, why are we doing this? We're making it too easy. It's not. What the SRA had noticed is through the thousands of training contracts that they'd supervised and seen, nobody has actually failed the training contract. So at the end of it, the supervising solicitor signs off the person is competent to be a solicitor. They never got a form back saying incompetent. However, they did notice that thousands of people were being trained, being paid a salary as well, 2 years at a firm, but then not being kept on at the firm. So it was very obvious what was going on in terms of capability and whether a person is competent or not. So the SRA said, look, we're going to take back competency through the SQE route and give more flexibility in how people qualify. So the great thing for you today is the type of work experience you can do is very, very flexible. You could do work at university placements. You could do it at Citizens Advice Bureau. Work experience from overseas jurisdictions also count. It really empowers you, the individual, to be able to use your work experience and then put that together with the qualification and not be at the behest of a firm waiting for a training contract. So we see a lot of people using flexible routes. That said, a lot of firms are running training contracts, but using SQE as the underlying qualification system as well. So when you see training contracts out there today, most of them are probably going to be referring to QWE. But I think that the term training contracts can stay around forever because lawyers like to stick with the old terms that they know. Just to recap on the costs, so the SQE route, you've got your pre-SQE costs, so your degree or equivalent costs that you need to do. You don't need to study a prep course. People do self-study and people do pass self-studying as well. The cost though is significant for the exams, nearly 2,000 for SQE1 and nearly 3,000 for SQE2. If you don't pass the exam, you need to repurchase the exam. SQE1 is split in 2 parts, so if you only failed one half, you would only need to purchase that half of the exam. But overall, the cost becomes quite significant if, say, just one resit is needed, and there is a time limit. So there's an attempt limit. You can only take it 3 times. After that, you'd have to wait 6 years. So it costs, start at around 4,500 for the assessment, go to around 10,000 with assessments and online preparation course. Our courses come in at around the price of the assessments. And of course, they're funded options, but they start going into the tens of thousands as well. So the cost really varies with this particular route. Now that we've recapped on the SQE, let's have a look at the licensed conveyancer and probate practitioner route, and we'll follow that with the SILEX route to give you a baseline to compare. So you'll notice some similarity, and there's 4 steps, much like the SQE, but in fact, the CLC route's been around for 30 years, and a lot of what we see on SQE, the way it's done, has been modeled on these flexible routes. To become a licensed conveyancer, your educational prerequisite is you don't have to have a degree. You can come out of school and go through this route. You'd start at level 4 in that case. I'll assume that everyone on this call is going to have a degree or has a degree already, and that's great because you get exemptions. So you won't need to do level 4 at step 2. You'd actually go straight on to level 6. If you've got an LPC or some other qualifications like SILEX qualifications, you may be entitled to further exemptions. So the route really recognizes prior learning and gives people exemptions that you don't have to spend the time and the money to study things that we know you already know. And this is particularly close to my heart because this was a challenge we faced, even I faced. Really pleased to be able to do that. And we spent a lot of time working with the CLC on the exemptions policy. It's by far the most comprehensive exemptions policy that's been published by any of the regulators. Once you've done that, you've got your diploma, you gain your qualifying work experience. The work experience here can be gained before, during, or after, your educational steps. So that's, again, very flexible. It does need to be in the area of law that you want to specialize in. So if you want to be a property lawyer, they want 1,200 hours over 2 years in property. And it can be done at multiple employers as well. Once you've done that, do your character suitability checks, and you apply for your first license. Let's have a look at the costs on this route. So the CLC route is incredibly cost effective by comparison to almost all the other routes, but particularly the SQE. So as law graduates, the only requirement for you to do would be the level 6 diploma, and that costs £2,475. It could be less if you had any exemptions. I think everybody's really pleased to hear this. When I tell them included in this fee, certainly the way we run the qualification, it may differ at different providers, but our fee includes exams and a resit. So a bit like a university, currently your exam is included. There's no extra payment to be made. And if you need a resit, unlikely, it's a very small number that do, that's also included. So very straightforward, all-inclusive fee. It includes all the materials, the books, and everything that you need. So it's £2,475 in total, so less than an SQE2 assessment. It's kind of no surprise in that for us, it's the most sponsored route by law firms. It's very clear for the law firm. It's very clear the output. It's very clear as well the cost and accessible. So it's a really popular route for the law firms. If you're thinking, well, I'd like to do it properly, but I'd also like to do something else, dual qualifying through this route is very accessible as well. An additional 2 exams, £1,800, allows you to then become a probate practitioner as well, which all but future-proofs your career, because the kind of work that's involved in that is ongoing. Here's a case study about someone who's done the CLC route with us, Leva Russell. She actually went to university, saw that it wasn't quite a good fit for her, and got into work in a law firm. And she, in fact, started a journey through the Silex route, through the old, we call now the legacy route, some time back. Things had evolved, and by the time she came close to qualifying, it became a better fit for her to switch to the CLC route. And since she studied with us and completed a qualification, she did some level 4 and then a level 6. She's gone on to become director of a law firm. She heads up her property division, and she, supervises and manages solicitors within that firm. So it's a fantastic example of no glass ceiling and what's achievable through this route. And this very mind was someone who didn't even have the degree element. So you guys have a big step up already in terms of the knowledge that you've got. Let's move on to the Silex qualification and how that works. So Silex has evolved tremendously in the last few years, and we have a new route with Silex called the CGQ lawyer route, and that stands for Silex Graduate Qualification. It's based on a thing called CPQ, which is a Silex professional qualification, but for law graduates with this has to be law degrees from England and Wales only. They come in at the graduate route and they start at the advanced stage. So for non-graduates, I would start at the foundation stage, which would be 3 steps instead of 2 that you have for graduates. As a graduate, you come in at the advanced stage, and you could choose to get the title Silex Advanced Paralegal if you so wish at that stage. We're seeing how that's going through. Some people are taking that. Most people are just pushing straight through to get on to finish up and do the professional and gain the title Silex Lawyer. The title Silex Lawyer is the one that is the authorized person that's allowed to conduct reserved legal activities. So, and by the time you finish that route, you'd have chosen your specialism. So you might become a property lawyer, a family lawyer, commercial dispute resolution lawyer, or a criminal lawyer, or perhaps an immigration lawyer, using the various routes of specialism. Let's have a look at what it takes in terms of time to study and the qualifying work experience. So with the Silex route, it's between 12 to 24 months. People with more time in their hands typically finish in about 12. People who are working, we're seeing around 18 months to finish. Most of the learners that we work with either start whilst they're working, or they gain work whilst they're studying with us. So there's a lot of flexibility around this, like the CLC route as well. You can choose from various exam windows. With the CLC route, I should have mentioned, the exams are on demand, so it's entirely flexible when you take your exams. They deliberately designed this way because we know that people who are studying and work at the same time need this extra flexibility. It's quite different once you hit the workplace and you're not a full-time student anymore, so you've got to structure your work to fit around things. We've discussed the qualifying work experience. It's 2,300 hours over a period of 3 years. It needs to be in the area that you want to specialize in as well. But of course, again, it's possible to use multiple employers as well. The exam route this year is online timed exams. There are 8 assessments, and there's a professional skills project that goes along with it. There are some multiple choice in this. It's around 25% of an assessment, but it's nothing like SQE 1 multiple choice, in case that's what you are. That's a common question I get. So what does it cost? What's the investment you need to become a chartered legal executive through the CGQ route? By the way, I'll get a summary information sheet out to you by email with the costs and things like that on you. So if you're trying to scribble it down within a mobile phone and you can't see those numbers that well, don't worry, we'll get these out to you. The number that you want to look at is the total at the end, and it's between £6,000 and £6,719 to qualify, depending on the pathway that you choose with the CGQ route. The reason we've shown the costs separately is to illustrate that these costs can be spread out over time. Some of these costs can be paid for in installments as well. So you've got a lot of flexibility. You don't need to have £6,000, £6,700 up front when you start your SILEX journey. A lot of our learners start with the advanced stage, seek employment, and get sponsored or partially sponsored for the advanced stage as well. If you wanted to gain litigation and advocacy rights for family, civil, or commercial, it's an extra £1,700 for an additional advocacy course that you do, and then you get your rights of audience alongside that as well. So again, a very cost-effective route, and it's around the cost of the SQE assessments plus 1 resit, for example. And Charlotte, Charlotte was in fact one of our early students from when we used to run night school. So when we started, we had to run classes in the evening before we could go fully online. And it was a real challenge getting people in at 5, 6 o'clock in the evening till 9, 10 o'clock at night, talking about land law and conveyancing. I like to think land law is interesting, but not everybody kind of agreed come 8:30 in the evening. But Charlotte was a great student. She went to a fantastic university. She was first in her family to go to university. She did really well. She got a high grade in her law degree. But with her family finances and just the chances of getting a training contract, she wasn't comfortable taking the gamble of the LPC route. And a lecturer told her about the SILEX route, and she came to us to talk about it and decided on an action plan, and she settled down to do the conveyancing as well as probate alongside that, and in fact found work in a firm doing property and found out that she really loved that. And she qualified through that route, and today she's at Martin Toller Solicitors, one of the largest property firms in Kent, and she's a fully qualified chartered legal executive with practice rights in that area. And the sky's the limit. There's no glass ceiling on her. Her firm is one that has a lot of chartered legal executives as partners as well, and I've no doubt that she'll make that quite soon. Let's wrap up with the barrister route, just to give context to all of this. I think most of you are quite familiar, so I'll go through quite quick because I want to leave some time for questions and answers as well. As you know, with the barrister route, your academic stage is anything from 3 to 5 years, depending on whether you've got a law degree or you need to do a GDL. You then have the vocational stage, 1 to 2 years, and then your pupillage. Now, it's no big secret that the barrister route is by far the most expensive route to qualify, and the costs are significant, and that's without the living costs associated, because all of these costs are assuming full-time studies. You can work alongside it, and some people do that. It's an incredible amount, though. When you're looking at the route, most people are saying, well, either I want to be a barrister because it's a title I admire, and that's an okay reason, but really people are probably wanting to become barristers because they want to conduct advocacy. And this particular route presents its own unique challenges. If you think the training contracts are scarce, check out what pupillages are like. And you've got even more student loan debt at the front end of this particular course. And we've seen, I've got personal friends that from law school who've had to retrain out of being a barrister and become a solicitor or other types of lawyers to make ends meet because the work simply dried up, especially in criminal. The legal aid funding is very, very low. It was nothing like that 20 years ago. It's changed a lot radically. But the good news is, if you want to do advocacy and you're worried about these costs, you don't have to go down this route to conduct advocacy. The solicitor route, and this includes the SQE route, has the option to become a solicitor advocate. SILEX also have the option to become a chartered legal executive advocate. Both of these routes give you rights of audience. You can also go on to get higher rights of audience and have the same rights of audience as a barrister for that route. The beauty of that way of doing it is you don't carry the risk of the cost of becoming a barrister, but you also don't have your hands tied in terms of what kind of work you can do. A barrister is, for example, not allowed to do conveyancing. They don't have the ability, the skill set, the training. Whereas a chartered legal executive or solicitor can do that kind of work. So you can get involved whilst you're studying, do meaningful work that can actually earn you an income, build up your career, be part of a firm, and then go and branch out into advocacy. Because the problem with advocacy, especially for barristers, is feast or famine, and it's limited to what they can do because they don't run a firm. They are individuals, often self-employed, mostly self-employed as well. With dual qualifying and becoming a solicitor advocate or a chartered legal executive advocate, you're able to have the benefits that come with the stability of the work and the income that comes with being one of those lawyers, but also get to do the advocacy when that comes in. If there isn't a lot of advocacy around for whatever reason at that time, you can fall back on the other work. So it's a route that I encourage for those of you who don't have a clear route on how you're going to get a pupillage. Have a look at those two routes and be happy to take questions about that. I think it's a lifesaver because I've, from personal experience, seen people go through this route and come out the other end without being able to sort of make ends meet, which is a shame given the amount that they invest in. But with the routes that are on offer now, you can have your cake and eat it, so to speak. This is the table I mentioned. We'll get this table out to you as an email. Basically, what we've done is we've looked at the costs, the practice areas, and the practice rights, and also what funding and sponsorship options are across each route, so you can quickly at a glance see and help make your decision using those factors along with the other 5 factors I talked to you about earlier. We've also put on the table the entry requirements, the training time and work experience, as well as the assessment, so you can sort of compare quite quickly. And I encourage people who are looking and deciding which way to go is look at these factors, look at all of this detail, as well as those 5 factors I talked to you about, so that you make the right decision for you at the time. And things might change. So, for example, you might be a graduate now without a particular job in hand, so you want to keep your outgoings low, and you look at one of the routes that cost less. None of these routes stop you from then qualifying to become an additional type of lawyer. So, for example, if you started as a licensed conveyancer because the costs are more accessible for you, it does not stop you from becoming a solicitor and doing the SQE. And in fact, we've had our first few people come through, both licensed conveyancers and chartered legal executives, who've now decided to dual qualify. So they're not giving up on the other qualification, they're actually dual qualifying through the SQE route, and were in fact granted exemptions from SQE 2 because of the work experience and knowledge that they demonstrate that they gained as practicing lawyers, as licensed conveyancers and chartered legal executives. So they've actually come out financially better off than if they just went down the SQE route straight away, because they've got the exemption, so they don't have to pay for that assessment or the prep for it, and they've saved time. Plus, they've been earning whilst they've been working as a licensed conveyancer or chartered legal exec for a few years as well. So they're out of their student debt, and they sort of in a cash positive position. So I encourage you to have a look at all of those routes when you're deciding, and the circumstance might change for you. So, for example, today you might not have a legal role, but tomorrow you may be offered a paralegal role, and that paralegal role might be in the family law department, and you particularly like that route, and that might influence your decision, and you might choose between SQE and Silex, for example, because those two cover practice rights and family. So I'll wrap up with an invitation to reach out to our team for any more specific queries that you have. Please do pop your questions in the chat. We do love a question and answer session. You're also welcome to come on camera and ask your question in person if you like. We do love those questions, so pop those on. In the meantime, though, do sign up to student newsletter and also get your LinkedIn account going if you haven't. LinkedIn is a bit of a funny one in terms of social media. It's from a different age in that it works on connections. So having connections is important because LinkedIn shows you feeds from up to 3 degrees connections away. And in England and Wales, certainly, there probably isn't a lawyer that isn't 1 or 2 degrees away from the other lawyer in the country. So connecting with me will put you on second line with 7,000 lawyers that I have, and it'll put you on third line connection with 30 something thousand more of my connections, plus Eve's connections, which is about 30,000, which is the cap that she's reached. And that's important for us. We like to see people get ahead. LinkedIn's an important place to make connections. The world is still important networking events to attend in that, but LinkedIn's a great place for you to virtually network and also learn about what lawyers are talking about, what interest lawyers, what's going on. It also gives you a great place to understand firms that you're eyeing up to apply to. So with that, I'll close this window and have a look at the questions. I believe we've got some questions in the chat, and if there are any more, please fire them across. Was there a question about the legal practice course? I think I saw something come up there.
Hi, Dean. Yes, that was me. I was just wondering if you could explain to the people who are listening to you about the legal practice and how that used to operate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great, Jen. You just reminds me, I should probably put a thing in my presentation because I just assume people know, and that's not fair. I do this day in, day out. So you'll see the word LPC being bandied around a lot. That means legal practice course, as Jen has said there. And under the before the legal practice course, if I'm right, Jen, legal practice course came in what, mid-90s? I think it was Solicitors Finals before that, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Going on a bit of a history tour, but I think it's important. So before the legal practice course happened, there was a thing called the Solicitors Finals, which is still exists in other countries like South Africa, and I believe India's the same, the US bar exam system as well. And people would go through that. The SRA / Legal Services Board at the time decided to set a standard of education, and we ended up with the legal practice course. And a prerequisite to get onto the legal practice course was to have a qualifying law degree. So it wasn't good enough just to have a law degree. You had to have a thing called a qualifying law degree. So some more acronyms for you guys, a QLD. Don't worry, if you don't have a qualifying law degree, this question does come up probably once every 2 months. Someone will email in saying, I just found out about a qualifying law degree. Do I have one? It doesn't matter anymore, but it did. Under the legal practice course route, you had to have a qualifying law degree which contained the core subjects like land law, English legal system, contract law, public law, which included EU law. And if I'm right, it had criminal laws as well, didn't it, Jane? I think 5 core areas, right? Then you had your electives. And you'll notice that these are kind of core areas that you'll see in the SQE prep as well. The legal practice course focused on the practical elements. So it would build on, so you studied land law, for example, in your law degree, you then look at conveyancing law and practice in your LPC. So you look at the practical element of how you do that. Same for criminal litigation and so on. You would also study solicitors' accounts in that unit, which is a very valuable thing to do, and unfortunately is not assessed to that standard anymore under SQE because it's just multiple choice, and this is where licensed conveyancers are coming into their own because they still do full accounts, and insurers really like that. So with the LPC, you needed to do this qualification. This was a prerequisite to you qualifying as a solicitor. Now, only once you've done the law degree or GDL and they were qualifying, and done the LPC where you academically qualified. I always thought the LPC should have been 2 or 3 years long, and the law degree could have been a little bit more compressed because there's so much covered in that single year. It was run over a year. It's really, really intense. SQE was designed to replace that and address some of those issues to varying degrees. I think SQE 1 has been less successful at addressing the issues than SQE 2 has been. SQE 2 certainly seems to be doing the job that we wanted to do. But effectively, what you'll see is with the LPC route, you had to have a training contract to qualify. So those people who have a training contract, who have an LPC, can't use the QWE route, which is the very flexible work experience bit. That's because the LPC was set by different institutions. So the SRA didn't set the exam and mark the exam. So the standards were all over the place. It was very little talked about, but SQE pass rates are talked about, but LPC pass rates are not that different to what SQE is today. The first few sittings of SQE 1 were terrible. They're below 50%. It's gotten a lot better. But that's what SQE replaces the LPC. So if you see that around and you're worried, should you get one, you need to be careful because you need to have been enrolled on a course around September 2021 to qualify to go down that route. The problem with that route is law firms are less inclined to run traditional training contracts under that method because it's a 3-way training contract. So it's between them, the SRA, and the trainee. They much prefer to run the SQE route, and that's not a discriminatory thing. It's a very practical and sensible thing. I'll one of the examples I have is from a firm in Northamptonshire. They had a person they run training contracts the old way with LPC as well as running SQE. And they had someone who'd been working in their corporate department for 2 years. And she really loved what she's doing. She's a really valuable part of the team. And they said, well, if they did the LPC and the training contract route, she'd need to rotate to 3 different seats. So she'd be out of the department for nearly a year. They couldn't afford that, nor did she want to actually do that. So she said chose the SQE route, and because she had already gained 2 years qualifying work experience at the firm paid for, by the way, for the prep course with us and the exams, and she qualified in record time, and she's now a corporate solicitor in that regard. So if you're looking at that, just bear in mind the LPC window has shut if you haven't been enrolled on the course prior to September 2021, and don't worry, I don't think you've missed out a lot. You will see a lot of talk. Lawyers, we do like to look in the rear view. We are precedent-based type thinkers, and there's a bit of rose-tinted glasses going on when we're looking in the rear view mirror with that one. I start to see the question coming from Tala. Hello there. If I'm a law graduate from Damascus University with no work experience yet, and I want to take one of these paths, do I have to study British law first or get straightforward into one of these courses? How can I start from scratch? Okay. So the solicitor route with the SQE qualification requires you to have a law degree, a degree, or a level 6 equivalent from any country in any language. So that route is a natural choice for what you're looking at if you're looking to go down and qualify in England and Wales. You would need the appropriate preparation, though, to get familiar with the English legal terms that will be tested in that, as well as for practice, of course. But nothing stopping you from going down that route, but you need the appropriate preparation. The work experience piece that you can gain wherever. It's if you're wanting to practice in England and Wales, you probably want to gain that. If you're looking to dual qualify in your home country, for example, you might use some of your work experience on that. The SRA will accept both. So that gives you quite a flexible option. If you said, well, SQE perhaps cost-wise or the practice areas aren't quite your area that you want to do, you could take either of the other routes. So you could go down the Chartered Legal Executive route and the Licensed Conveyancer route. The Council for Licensed Conveyancers do recognize overseas degrees, but they do need to be based on English common law. And I may be wrong, but as far as I'm aware, I think law degrees from Damascus University, so Syria, would not be based on English common law. So they would require you to do level 4. And I've got quite a few overseas graduates who do this. So a couple I have from Poland, actually working in Malta. For an accounting firm who's doing legal work as well, wanted to, or even though they could have got an exemption on the UK qualification, wanted to brush up and get familiar. So you cover things like English legal system, contract law, land law, and conveyancing or probate. That's set at level 4, and you'll gain a level 4 diploma for that one. And then you'll go on to your level 6 and then qualify through that route. The CLC route for you on that, although it sounds long-winded, can be done in 2 years or less. So we've had people who are studying full-time do it in less than 2 years. You gain 4 years access with the diplomas anyway across both diplomas. And the costs are, a little bit, just a little bit more than what it takes for the 2 SQE settings. So you've got an option there. The SILEX qualification would need a UK law degree. So if you wanted to do the SILEX graduate qualification that I talked about, you would need the UK law degree piece. If you said, well, that's not going to be an option for you, you could go down the SILEX CPQ route. So that's where you don't start at advanced, but you start at foundation stage. And from start to finish, going through the CPQ route, so for the non-law graduate pathway, you'd probably be looking at between 2 to 4 years and total costs of around £12,000 in total spread over that period. So to sum up, you've got all the routes are open to you. It just depends the starting point based on the overseas law degree that you have already. I hope that answers your question, Tala. Do we have any more questions, or have I missed anything in here? So perhaps I'll jump into some of the most commonly asked questions that I sort of get, unless you've got any ones that you've want to pop in. Jane, did you have any from your students or anything like that, or maybe I sparked some interest from you on this one?
No, if you go with the frequently asked questions, I do have one, but I'll pop it in the chat. So it's
Okay,
quicker if
great.
you carry on.
No problem, that's fine. Some of the questions we get, particularly around becoming a licensed conveyancer, people know, well, people are attracted because the route's very streamlined and particularly cost effective. But people do ask me a lot, well, what if I change my mind? What if I become a licensed conveyancer and I don't enjoy working in property law? In the old days, people would qualify in an area and probably stick with that area, whether they liked it or not, for decades. It was very unusual for lawyers to switch practice areas. Nowadays, it's totally acceptable, much more common, and sometimes by some firms encouraged. So one area you might see is, well, you might put the two pieces together and say, well, I can afford this route, and there's a lot of conveyancing jobs around where I live. So this ticks two major boxes for me. Let me do that route. And you enjoy it, but let's say you get bored of doing that. There's a number of options open to you. One of them would be to dual qualify into probate. So a lot of people like to move into that area for a change of pace. The other option is to perhaps say you like property, but you're more interested in the contentious side. By the time you've qualified as your licensed conveyancer, you will be entitled to exemptions from the SQE route, and you could then qualify as a solicitor specializing in property and deal with disputes, for example. So you could move a sideways move within property and moving into that. The other thing you could do, and this would require no additional study or cost, is to move from residential to commercial. The licensed conveyancer route covers both commercial and residential, and most of the jobs that you'll see are the market is flooded with residential conveyancing jobs, but when you look around, there's also a lot of commercial property jobs. And commercial is quite different to residential conveyancing. So residential conveyancing works to a formula, whereas commercial property tends to be on a contract basis. And provided nothing is illegal or immoral, business-to-business property transactions are very interesting because they can agree to all sorts of clauses. So, for example, you could have a clause in a lease that says the curtains have to be changed to pink ones for 1 day every 3 years. That's not such a far-fetched example, by the way. Some old leases have some incredibly traditional clauses in there for various reasons, dating back hundreds of years, and they still exist in the leases today. So that's an example of going down that particular route and moving around within that particular route. The other thing to keep in mind is you don't have to remain a lawyer within a law firm. Law firms have grown from what is essentially a cottage industry, and I don't mean any negative connotation by that, but in business terms, people refer to that as these types of businesses often as a cottage industry, meaning that it's quite a colloquial British term, in that it's a business run by the people who set up to do it. So people set out to become a lawyer, and they end up building a law firm without actually intending to. How it tends to happen is a person says, oh, I really enjoy practicing family law, and they build up a client base, and they have too much work, and they start taking a paralegal, and then there's more work, and somebody else says, well, I can join and become a partner, I'll bring some clients, and they end up building a firm. And that's why most law firms were partnerships before. They weren't allowed to be limited companies, and that's why you see that in LLP at the end of a lot of them. And that's a hangover from the times when law firms were run as partnerships or then limited liability partnerships. Law firms are now allowed to become limited companies, so it's also known as alternative business structures. And what that means is they're allowed to operate as an actual business, and the way it should be. And what's going on with that is law firms are quickly realizing that, well, some people in the law firm want to be lawyers, conduct law and do client work. Other people have gained all of these skills, understand how the thing works, but there's a huge need within the business. So there's a whole lot of business functions that need filling in law firms. So you need people who understand tech and who can stay on top of what kind of tech the people are going to be using in the law firm. There's in-house developing or going on. There's a lot of testing. There's a lot of researching as to what kind of tech needs to be used and how to manage that process. That's a massive topic, and I haven't even spoken about AI yet, of course. AI is there to be implemented and used in law firms. It's going to need people to be able to manage and help people use that system better. There's other functions like finance functions. So you might say, well, actually, I've got quite an interest in the financial side of things, and maybe the accounts unit that you studied in your CLC qualification got you interested in that. There's a huge dearth of people needed to do legal accounting. It's a complex and very interesting field. There's a lot of compliance that comes with it, and there's not enough people to do the compliance for law firms. Other functions that are available within law firms include business development. They need to operate like any other business. They need to gain clients. They need to find clients. They need to do their marketing and business development. And increasingly, we're seeing lawyers move into that space to do that. I think that there's also the HR function. So lawyers, law firms' biggest asset, it's not the tech, it's not just the name of the door, it's really the people that they have. That's still a people business, and despite all the tech that's coming in, it'll remain a people business. And looking after those people is an important function. So qualifying as a lawyer, working in a law firm, but then doing these other functions gives you a distinct edge. And part of the reason we run other qualifications alongside, so for example, Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, is for lawyers who get qualified and are thinking about moving into different areas within a law firm. So it's okay today if you make a decision. You don't have to be stuck in that particular area of law or that particular job role. The market is incredibly dynamic. Law firms are evolving at a rate that, in 10 years of running the Law Training Center and 20 years since I graduated from law school, it's frankly unbelievable to see what the rate of change and the innovation that's happening in law firms. Back then, I remember getting resistance. I had to learn how to use a fax machine, which I'm guessing almost everyone on this call probably doesn't even know how to use one. But when I used the internet for legal research, I was told in early 2000s, oh, that's cheating. How can you use the internet? Why don't you go to the law library and pull out the book? And I'm like, well, it's much quicker, and it was accurate as well. Bearing in mind, we didn't have Westlaw and Practical Law products like that that were so accurate as they are today. So there's a lot you can do with what you do. So if you're not sure today, but you know you want to work in law and you need to get earning and you need to get qualified, don't think you're stuck with that decision for the rest of your career. There's a lot of ongoing learning, and that's sponsored by law firms as well to carry on and develop. So I know that we've come to the end of our time, but if there are any last questions people want to pop in, I'm more than happy to take them.
Hi, Dino. Thank
Hi,
you
Jane.
so much. Has anybody got any additional questions? I've got just one very small one, and I'm sure you've said it, Dino, but the level 6 qualification, is it the CLC? How long do people generally take to pass that?
Okay, so we've had people do it in as little as, I think, 4 months. That's kind of a record.
Yeah.
Recommended at least 3 months per unit within that diploma. The diploma is made up of 3 subjects. So conveyancing, law and practice, landlord and tenant, and accounts. For full-time student, 3 months each is plenty. So it's about 9 months. On average, it's about 12. People who are working full-time, perhaps managing childcare as well, they tend to take maybe 12 to 18 months. But yeah, pretty straightforward. We've actually got some law students who've picked this up in year 2 and year 3 during their summer holidays, and they're adding this on. So they can actually get a head start. They can't be awarded the full diploma, but you can gain the individual units. And once you present your law degree, you're then able to meet the requirement to issue the diploma as well. So
that's fantastic, isn't it? It kind of brings it all to life at that particular point.
Well, interestingly enough, they're from around the Birmingham area. There seems to be a lot of switched on people around there, around your neck of the woods.
Absolutely. Up in the Midlands, this is where it's all at. Dino, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate the time. I'm assuming if students have got any additional questions, you're open to them contacting you afterwards for a bit more of a chat. And online, search your Law Training Centre online. I've had a look. It's got loads of additional information there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a fantastic team. Rebecca looks after the team that deals with all the student queries. Between us, there isn't anything we haven't seen. So yeah, fire away. There's a whole team waiting to answer questions. And by the way, there's no silly question. We don't expect you to know all of this stuff. So it's amazing how shy some people can be, thinking they expect you to know these things. You're not. It's okay. This is all new information, and appreciate that. That's fine.
Yeah, no, I've been learning a lot. So no, it's really, really interesting. Thank you, Dino.
Well,
And
thank you for
thank you
organising it,
everyone
Brian.
who's thank you. It's a real pleasure, and I'm so delighted that the Warwickshire Junior Lawyers Division and Law Training Centre have come together to offer this additional advice. So thank you.